Hello, Collectivites. This is Acoustic speaking, presenting to you the Wanderstar Report, the internet show all about Collective, the community-created card game. Now, before I begin, I am very sorry for my extended absence. The last 2 weeks for me have been plagued with difficulties which got in the way of producing the show. Because of this, I've made some adjustments that should prevent something like this from happening again in the future. Also, just a heads up, this episode will be a bit shorter since, due to a general lack of exposure to the new metagame and Sevas' deck-building site being down for the time being, today's episode of the Wanderstar Report will be without the showcase section. Anyway, without further ado, let's dive in to the week review. Lizardep Guard looks to be absolutely bonkers for Marie. For 3 mana, you have a 4 health exhaust engine that can also block each turn thanks to its Vigilant. This allows spirit control decks to lock down the opponent's strongest unit while also stopping the attacks of their smaller units at the same time. This synergizes incredibly well with Trapped, as this becomes absolutely disgusting if you can give it Regenerate. Overall, this is a really strong card that supports an already really strong deck. Charge Shark is an interesting aggro card, if a bit awkward. The ability to steal cards from the opponent's hand is nice for removing their ability to stop your plays, if nothing else. However, the Shark's weak body means it's generally activating its effect once at most, if at all, since a unit with 3 or more HP can stop this in its tracks. We'll just have to see if the potential upside of ripping cards from the opponent's hand is worth the risk it takes to activate it. For Apocalypse seems to be nothing more than a bad meme. Currently, the card pool lacks units with the specified tribes to efficiently discount this, and even if it did, you need so many units to discount this to a reasonable level as to not even be worth it. Perhaps it's good in Legacy. The Stress Signal is a quirky CA generator, but it's unfortunately under curve at the moment. Without fulfilling the condition, generating 2 off-affinity cards is incredibly bad due to the concept of off-affinity penalty. And even after you fulfill the condition, getting 2 semi-random cards can be very hit or miss, and it becomes less helpful the more synergy focused your deck is. Truth be told, this could probably cost 1 mana, if only due to how weak the base mode of the card is. Either way, I do think it is an interesting design at least. Apprentice Alchemist is a cute, cheap active unit. For a 1 mana tax, the Alchemist gives you some deck rigging and mana cheat, which for a 1-drop is pretty useful. However, while the utility is nice, the Alchemist's body is a pathetic 1/1, meaning it dies to a light breeze, which can make it hard to utilize. As well, off the top of my head, I can't really think of a current deck that would want to run this, at least not yet. I don't think it's a bad card, but it might struggle to find a place to shine for a good bit of time. Guiding Constellation is an incredibly powerful draw tool for Ashgari. At base, it's already an upgrade over Golden Ticket in most cases, and if you can fulfill the condition, it's a 1 mana draw 2. This allows Ashgari decks to quickly refill their hands for cheap as long as they can keep proccing their passive. This in turn makes it easier to proc the passive on future turns. It sort of feeds into itself like that. Of course it's going to be an Ash staple, I don't need to tell you that, but honestly, the base form is probably just good enough to be a generic Mind staple as is, at least if your deck needs some more draw. Big Blip is, the card has a lot of fluff on it to effectively say Rage gain +1/+1. I suppose it could be a bit more with cards like Flag Bearers, but that's what it's going to be for the most part. After all, if the tokens get made during combat, it's not like they're really going to get killed before the turn ends. I suppose a scaling life bond unit can put in some work depending on the scenario, but the scaling mechanism itself is a bit clunky. Sorry, I don't have a lot to say about this one, it's just not very exciting in my opinion. Hammer Throw acts as an interesting side grade to Cat with Frying Pan. The Herald this card creates is 1 health beefier than the Cat, but is limited by the damage effect only hitting the opponent. Overall, I think this is probably weaker in most scenarios, since the extra health doesn't make Herald any more threatening for the most part. What that extra health can be useful for is in Helldip, to help increase your chances of proccing your passive in the first turns of the game. Who knows, some aggro decks may want to run both, we'll just have to see. Oh boy, I sure do love Exemplar. At least this one's locked behind reaching level 3. As you can see, Playball is an upscaled Cat with Frying Pan with flying and gains more keywords as you level up. The KM implication is pretty obvious, both her being the only hero with a non-traditional level curve, allowing you to level her up faster, meaning this gets Exemplar faster, which is clearly the most important keyword on this card, let's be real here. However, this might also be a solid Helden or Pearlmaw card, as it plays well with buffs like Soul Cleaver, though perhaps strength would need either faster ways to gain EXP, or good buff actions, or both. Personally, Exemplar as a keyword makes me groan, but maybe people can find some cool stuff with this. Pariah the Relentless has to be one of the most absolutely busted cards I've seen in a while. This card has 2 modes. At 3 mana, it's a 3/2 that gives another ally Undying when it dies, which is an incredibly powerful effect, especially if you have any decently sized or hard to kill units to slap the effect onto. With the Surge, however, you get 4 Pariahs and a bootleg Alexstrasza effect, meaning 12 8 worth of stats, 4 potential Undying procs, and an opening to burst down the opponent no matter how high their health was before that. This card absolutely should be 4 mana, as both modes are currently ridiculously overcurved, and the card in its current state absolutely has the chance to make Marie an undisputed tier 0 deck. Charming Rattler is bad. Under a system where units enter play readied, forcing a unit to attack isn't helpful enough to be worth a card slot in your deck. The time where you can force an enemy attack and block that unit in combat to kill it are few and far between, and in most cases, you'll be better off just running a removal card in its place. Or, if you're strength, you can use time to duel and not have to wait until combat. This type of effect has historically not been good on collective, and it's not going to be good this time. Now, this week also came with some balance updates. Combat Encounter is now 6 mana, up from 5. Turns out this card single-handedly allowed Pearlmaw control decks to freely pivot to an aggro game plan depending on the matchup, due to how much value this one card provided in terms of board presence. Now with cost bump, it should still be good for aggro and mid-range decks, without giving control a free way to rush down opponents, which they shouldn't really be doing in the first place. High Prosecutor Dahlin got 2 nerfs, a cost bump from 7 to 8, and the cost of the created copy changed from a flat 0 to half the cost of the banished unit. Essentially, a 7 mana 6/6 that removed a unit was proven to be too strong, and the 0 cost copy let you effectively steal your opponent's top ends using revive effects. Finally, Age Defender got +1/+1. This most likely will not affect the card's performance much, considering the card's 2 keywords are at odds with one another, and it can really only use one at a time without outside help. Maybe I'm wrong, but I wouldn't get your hopes up. This week is certainly something. Feels like every card here is either niche at best, or will break the meta in 2. On one hand, you have cards like Charming Rattler and Apocalypse that will most likely do nothing for their entire time in Standard. And on the other, you have cards like Lizardep Guard and Pariah, which are almost game-breakingly strong. Seems like the trend for this week was cards that desperately needed more time in the oven in terms of balance. Maybe future balance updates can alleviate some of these issues, but we'll see. Perhaps the next week will be better. Let's check by looking at the collective subreddit, past and present. Starting with the current week, we have Energy Surge, a simple removal from budding designer Chomp the Head. Essentially, it's a side grade to Fireball, losing its ability to hit the opponent directly for a 1-cost surge to make the card cantrip. Generally, removal that cantrips trends towards the stronger end of power, and I imagine this would be no different. 2 mana deal 3 is premium value in terms of removal, and being able to turn excess mana into more fuel is a welcome bonus for many control decks. I imagine this will end up becoming the Control Fireball if it gets in, whereas anything faster will probably just stick to the original. Next, we have Samurai Hammer Mage, another card in the Hammer Mage cycle, archetype, whatever it is. This card specifically is a big duelist that spits out heralds on death, making it have good stats for the cost, perhaps a bit too good. For 5 mana, a 4/6 duelist that creates 2 1/2s on death is just a bit too many stat points. I'd suggest either raising it to 6 mana, or lowering the stats of the main body to 1/1 or 0/1. Otherwise, I think it's a fine enough idea for a mid-sized duelist. And lastly for this week, we have Soul Scourge, a rather interesting take on the ninja style. This card is able to fuel itself using the units in your graveyard, able to resurrect one each time it hits the opponent before stealing its attack and immediately killing it. This opens up some neat synergies, even if the attack gain is clunky due to proccing after Soul Scourge already hit the opponent. However, in its current state, I feel the card limits design space, since any high-cost unit with a strong entrance or entomb can't really be printed without breaking the power of this card's effect. I'd suggest imposing some sort of cost limit on the effect, maybe only being able to revive units that cost 5 or less. I think if the ceiling of the card's power is reined in a bit, it would be a very cool inclusion to the card pool. Now looking at the previous week, we have Preemptive Strike, the rare mind buff action. This lets you give the next unit you play an attack buff, while also giving it a dual effect when it's played. Now, the dual can actually be a double-edged sword, depending on both the size of the last unit your opponent played and that of the unit you're going to play. This is definitely a card that requires the player to be cognizant of the game state at all times. Overall, Preemptive Strike seems very hard to evaluate. Maybe it could be pushed to 1 mana, but I'm not sure. The Wandering Star is an interesting card, if a bit unfocused. The idea is that the first time you play this, you essentially get an immortal 3/1 for the rest of the game, with the star himself turning into a duelist on successive plays. Balance-wise, I think the card was fine in its earlier iterations, and its current 3/3 self is a bit on the weak side. On the other hand, I'm not quite sure where this is supposed to go deck-wise. The initial body is too slow for aggro to use effectively, the Sky Star what makes is a bit too aggressively statted for control decks to want it, and even though it's a ninja, it doesn't really share any mechanical ties with the tribe's archetypal pieces. I'd suggest moving the card in a direction where the main body and the token tie into each other more, since right now there's not a lot of mechanical relation between them, which is sort of making the design feel like it's wandering aimlessly. Finally, Juan, Lord of Sogan, looks to be a simple but powerful duelist. The initial stats are quite weak, really only being able to deal with tokens, but makes up for it by being able to buff one of her units after it duels, including itself. This makes Juan play well with other buffing effects to secure that first duel and start your momentum. I have a feeling that this and Talir Soldier will form a solid 2-card mid-range core for a variety of decks. In conclusion, a horse is not just a horse. He is horse. He is. So this glance at the subreddit has certainly been an interesting one. On the one hand, you have some very simple and clean designs, like Energy Surge and Juan, which were created for a particular purpose and seem to fulfill it admirably. And on the other, there were a lot of posts with interesting ideas, but ultimately need a few balance tweaks for me to really want them in game. Some of the biggest examples being Soul Scourge and Samurai Hammer Mage. Overall, a lot of cool concepts on display here, even if a good portion of them might need a few tweaks to fully realize their potential. And that marks the end of today's episode of the Wanderstar Report. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you have any feedback, please leave a comment. I'd love to hear what the people think so I can improve my content for you, the viewer. In the description, you can find many helpful links related to Collective, including where to get the game and how to learn more about it. I look forward to seeing you all next week. This is Acoustic, signing off.